Well, good morning. Welcome to day 17 of this 31-day journey through the book of Proverbs. Each day we look at a chapter of the wisdom writing and kind of dissect it a little bit. Hopefully we're being challenged by the truth of God's word. Today in Proverbs 17, we kind of again see this pattern of kind of some disconnected, fragmented Proverbs. But I think, again, if you read it a few times, you'll start to see these common threads that are running through them, not only through each chapter, but that chapter by chapter, those same threads and thoughts being carried through. So in chapter 17, I saw a couple of topics that had come up a couple times. One is conflict. We see in verse 1, better a dry crust eaten in peace than a house filled with feasting and conflict, right? Better to eat dry crust, right? Stale bread in peace than in a house filled with feasting, right? With great food, lots of options, a great spread, and conflict. In verse 14, he says, starting a quarrel is like opening a floodgate. So stop before a dispute breaks out, right? Once the floodgate is opened, there's that's the point of no return, right? We're not going to be able to close those floodgates literally if they've been opened. Once the water starts pouring out, we got to wait until the water gets down low enough that the gates could be closed again. So starting a quarrel, right? Instigating a dispute is like opening the floodgates. Once it starts, they're open. We lose control. So he says the warning is to stop before a dispute breaks out. Verse 19 says, anyone who loves to quarrel loves sin. People who just love conflict, love to disrupt, love to antagonize. Those people who love to quarrel love sin. That's a pretty strong statement. But it is a proverb. It is in God's word, so it's something we need to take serious. Jesus in the New Testament, there's a lot of teaching on unity and the idea of togetherness and not seeing divisions and separation, but rather seeing each other as children of God. And in Matthew 5:9, Jesus says that God blesses those who work for peace. God blesses the peacemakers. They will be called the children of God, right? What a high honor to be called the child of God. Not only just to be called the child of God, but to be a child of God, to be in the family of God, to be an heir to the throne, right? The peacemakers, those who work towards peace, right? The opposite of those who love to quarrel and fight. Jesus talks about the unity between him and the Father and how he desires that to be with us, his followers, and that the world will know his followers, his disciples, because they love each other, right? That there's unity, there's this lack of conflict and division. So we say that we need to fight for unity, right? If we're going to fight for something, then let's fight for unity. The second topic I seen in chapter 17 was this idea of family and the relationships. Verse 6 talks about, it says, grandchildren are the crowning glory of the aged. Parents are the pride of their children, right? There's great rewards and blessing in children and grandchildren. And then in verse 21 and 25, though, it talks about kind of the other side of that it is painful to be the parent of a fool. There is no joy for the father of a rebel. Verse 25 says, foolish children bring grief to their father and bitterness to the one who gave them birth, right, to their mother. That foolish children bring grief to their father and bitterness to their mother. It's painful to be the parent of a fool. And there's no joy for the father of a rebel. So we could see how the relationship is impacted by the lifestyle, the decisions, the path that a child takes. We can have great rewards. The grandchildren can be the crowning glory of the aged. Parents are the pride of the children. But we also see that it can be painful. It can rob us of our joy. It can take it away. There's no joy in it. It causes grief. It causes bitterness when we have a child who is foolish, according to God's word here. So to me, this strengthens the argument that we've already seen that we need to parent, we need to train, teach, correct children to be wise. We need to teach them to be wise because the reward is in watching them repeat that process with their own children and experiencing the joy that comes with, children and grandchildren who are living according to God's will. But it takes work. And we know that if we choose not to train to teach correct, if we decide to be a lazy parent and just kind of hands off and let nature take its course, then that's the surefire way to raise a foolish child. And we know what comes with that. Then we see in verse 14 or 15 this idea that the Lord detests, and we saw this earlier in Proverbs, that there were certain things that the Lord hated. And we see in this one, verse 15, that the Lord detests acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent. Justifies the wicked. This is what he detests, when we justify the wicked and condemn the righteous. We should be condemning the wicked and justifying the righteous. But oftentimes in this broken world, we see that the guilty get acquitted and the innocent are condemned. I think this is beyond the scope of a courtroom, but just in life, our views, our treatment of other people, and we condemn innocent people and we justify the guilty. So we could see how this is played out. Do we make excuses for people or even ourselves when we're living below God's standard? Do we find ways to justify somebody's wicked, bad behaviors? Do we enable them to continue? Do we find excuses and reasons for them to do what they're doing, even when it's against God's will? If you've ever seen the show Intervention, tragic, sad stories of people who are struggling with addiction that is taking their life. But there's always one person in each story who is enabling the addict, that's making sure they have the money they need to buy the drugs that they require for their addiction. And almost always when the interventionist comes in, there's strong correction towards that one person. And there's somebody who sees this as good. They're compassionate, maybe this is love, but the reality is they're not helping them. They're justifying bad behavior. They're making excuses. Not that many of those people didn't have tragic, traumatic experiences, but there's a healthy way to deal with those. And feeding somebody, with a behavior, feeding that behavior that's killing them is not the right way to do it. But when I thought about how do we justify the wicked and condemn the innocent, oftentimes it's how we enable, we make excuses, we justify somebody's bad behavior, and we walk alongside them. So we have to make sure that we don't do that. And when the world is calling what is good bad and what is bad good, we need to stand up for God's truth. What is right, and what is wrong. And then we see the poor, the last thing I'll mention from chapter 17 in verse, I drew a blank 5. He says, those who mock the poor insult their maker. Now we saw this in chapter 14, verse 31, this idea of the poor and the treatment of the poor. We mock the poor. It insults their maker, insults our maker. And this to me speaks loudly to the idea that how we treat others has a direct impact on God. That we're not interacting with each other in some kind of vacuum that has no effect on anybody else around us or even God. And I'm not sure we even consider that our judgment and treatment of somebody else is an insult to God, directly to God. It's beyond the unfairness that we may be displaying toward a person, and the poor treatment that we act towards them. But it goes beyond that, and it's an insult to God. So may we consider the magnitude of the way we treat each other. So I hope you find this helpful. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for Proverbs 18. Thanks for joining.